Chapter 10. Yes, hissed Zach. So that's who you are, Tasha. He'd finally found her, but only on a computer screen. The monitor displayed a long-legged, black-spotted cat. It was neither a cheetah nor a leopard. The paw prints were wrong for both of them. He discovered that a cheetah's print would show claws, as it can't retract them, while a leopard's print was far too big. No, this had to be her. Zach was sure. He grabbed the mouse and scrolled down to the information below the image. Name: Serval, Makanu, Swahili, African wildcat, Leptellurus serval. Size: length 1 meter, including tail. Tail 35 centimeters. Height 60 centimeters at shoulder. Weight up to 18 kilograms. Jumping 2.7 meters, high from standing, higher when running, 3.5 meters long from standing, longer when running. Black, sometimes found in cooler mountain areas. White, never recorded in the wild, extremely rare in captivity. Sounds: a wide range of noises, high-pitched mews and chirping, snarls, hisses and growls when upset or unsure, purring when happy. Threats: fur trade, pet trade. A big cat, but not as scarily huge as a lion, tiger, or leopard. Zach found this reassuring. While he hadn't been frightened during his brief encounter with her, pig hunter Brian's comments about a leopard had worried him. Leopards could kill big animals such as antelope, and some even became man-eaters. Servals had a much smaller head, which restricted their diet to birds and small mammals. All this was good news as far as the farm animals were concerned. Sheep were too big, and the homestead didn't have any chooks. Possums would have to watch out, though. Zach smiled to himself. Maybe Jim Shirley would welcome having a serval on the property if it helped keep the possum population down. The next task was to find out if there was any link between Mikhail Popanoff and servals. There were lots, including photos of him in Africa, alongside the wild cats. Apparently, he made huge donations to groups protecting big cats. So that's what she is, said a voice from the doorway. Zach spun around. It was Jess. He hadn't heard her arrive. You could have knocked, he said, recovering from the shock. I did, said Jess. You were too busy staring at the computer. Have you just arrived? Yes, Mom brought me. She brought lunch, too. She's out there talking to your dad. Jess lowered her voice. Now answer my question. Is that Tasha? Not that one, but that's what she is. A serval, a white one. They're very rare. Jess's eyes narrowed. Did you go looking for her this morning? Her voice went hard. I thought we'd agreed to do this together. Calm down. I didn't go looking for her. I used science instead. He pointed to the bed. Sit down and I'll tell you about it. Lunch was a range of breads, pastries, and cakes bought from a bakery. They were a welcome change from sandwiches made with stale bread. Jenny McGonagall wasn't quite what Zach had expected. He had an image of what a fencer's wife should look like, and it wasn't this glamorous woman. She must have noticed something in his reaction, for her first words were, I don't always dress like this, Zach, but I had a meeting. That's why Jess has got the glad rags on, too. She's my assistant. For the first time, Zach noticed that Jess was wearing a dress. Mum's a marriage celebrant, explained Jess, and I help with the candles and things. Did you have a wedding this morning? Asked Zach. Jess shook her head. Just a practice. The wedding's on Sunday. Zach studied her clothes. They weren't suitable for the Wairiki Valley. Jenny chuckled. Don't worry, Zach. She's got a change of clothes in the car. Where are you going? Asked Crawford. I don't know, began Zach. Up the Wairiki stream, said Jess. If Zach's leg could have kicked under the table, he would have kicked her. Crawford stopped chewing. Are you? Great! I'll come too. I want to see what's left from the gold mining days. Have you read Terawhiti and the Goldfields? Asked Jenny. Yes, I have a copy, but I want to see the places for myself. I haven't been up there for years, said Jenny. Is it okay if I come too? I've got a change of clothes. Of course it was okay with Crawford. He could tell her all about the book. They then launched into a discussion on Terawhiti's past. Neither noticed the black looks being exchanged between their offspring. A rough track, wide enough for a four-wheel drive, took them the first couple of kilometers up the valley. All the while, Crawford and Jess's mum were talking about gold mining. The Wairiki stream was where the first nuggets were found in 1852. For the following 10 or so years, people had worked the stream in terraces looking for more. They found some, but never enough to make them rich. Even though Zach was worrying about Tasha, he found the conversation interesting, especially when Jenny pointed out ditches that had carried the water used to sluice gold from the gravel. The track ended at a grassed area where the valley divided in two. Cattle were grazing peacefully on the flat. That was when they saw the humans and ran into the bush, where they turned to stare while Jenny and Crawford discussed which way to go. They decided to go left, up Breakneck Creek, where they were more likely to find mine shafts. The creek took most of the water draining off Outlook Hill, which could be seen at the head of the valley. The going was tougher now, with the creek bed the only track. In places, sizable Nikau palms, ponga ferns, and other natives had replaced the gorse growing up the sides. Slippery rocks and foot-grabbing cracks gave a hint of how the creek might have got its name. Keeping their feet dry was impossible. Zach took the rear so he could secretly search the sandy spots for paw prints. There were imprints from pig trotters and from boots other than their own, but nothing to suggest a cat had passed before them. A couple of times he saw Jess fiddle with her backpack, as if to take out the roldie. If only they could play the music, then they might have a chance. Otherwise they had no show. Not that Zach wanted Tasha to appear while the adults were around. That would spoil it. The first meeting had to be just him, Jess, and Tasha. The creek narrowed as they climbed higher. At one place, the water had cut through the faults in the rocks, forming a gorge not much wider than their bodies. The first signs of rock mining were found not far above. A collection of large, rusting metal bits was scattered throughout the creek. Crawford said that they were parts of a machine used to crush quartz to extract the gold. The Phoenix mine must be up here somewhere, he said, pointing uphill. I can probably find it, said Jenny. I've been here a couple of times before. Do we have to go? Asked Jess in her best whining voice. Not if you don't want to, said Jenny. We'll have to come back this way. Crawford looked at Zach. What about you? I'll stay and keep Jess company. Okay, but don't go too far away. They promised not to. That was easy, chuckled Jess, when the adults had gone. But what if Tasha is hiding out in the mine? Asked Zach. Jess's smile faded. Oh, I hadn't thought of that. Do they live in caves? I don't know, but some big cats do. There are other smaller mines around here. She could be in one of those. Jess took out the roldie. She glanced up the side of the hill to where the adults had gone. Do you think they're far enough away? Zach shrugged. Doesn't matter if they hear. We're just playing with it. I wish it had better music, said Jess, turning on the machine. I've had enough of this noise. Maybe if she comes, we can train her to like something different, said Zach. If she comes, replied Jess. They settled to wait. It was a good a place as any. While there were plenty of plants growing around the stream, none were as unpleasant as the gorse that covered the hillsides. Minutes passed. The tune reached the end and returned to the start. By the time it was into its fourth loop, Zach's mind had wandered to other things, and he didn't see the stealthy movement high on the opposite side of the stream. Not until something caused him to look up. There was no sound nor anything else that he could detect. He just knew she was there. Her eyes were on his, green and bright, with black slits of pupils. The head was smaller than he'd anticipated, or maybe it was the enormous ears that made it seem so. The only movement was her tail, swaying back and forth. That, too, seemed smaller than it should be for the size of her body, almost as if somewhat of it had been chopped off. Zack stretched his hand out and touched Jess's arm. He pointed to Tasha. Jess's hand went to her mouth. "Oh my God," she gasped. "She is so beautiful." Zack nodded. She certainly was. So white that the word spotless came to mind. But that wasn't exactly true. Her coat had spots and stripes, too, but they were gray rather than black, almost as if bleached by the sun. The spots at her face and nose appeared as freckles. He felt an urge to touch her, but was scared to move closer in case she went away. "Tasha," he called softly. "Tasha." The tail stopped swaying. He stretched an open hand towards her as if offering food. Tasha watched it for a long moment before taking the first tentative steps across the stream. "It's all right, Tasha. I won't hurt you." A few more steps and she was close enough to touch if he leaned forward, and yet something told him that she had to be the one that made the first contact. If he did this wrong, he might lose her. After a long pause to be sure, Tasha took the last steps needed for her pink nose to touch his hand. She sniffed for a while before dipping her head and rubbing a cheek against his fingers. Zack let out the breath he hadn't known he'd been holding. He turned his hand and began stroking her head and neck. His hand touched something solid, a collar partially hidden by fur, confirmation that she was somebody's pet. She took another step, letting him reach down to her chest. Then she spoke to him for the first time, a mew so high-pitched that it could have been from a newborn kitten. She rubbed against his knees, begging to have her back stroked, and when he did, she began purring. Neither deep nor loud, simply a quiet sound of pleasure. "Can I have some of the action, too?" whispered Jess, moving closer and stretching out her hand. Tasha tested with a sniff before extending her tongue and rewarding Jess with a couple of licks. Jess sighed. Zack chuckled. "What's so funny?" asked Jess. "Your sigh sounded just like her purring." Jess nodded. "That's how I feel. I want to rub my head against her. She is just gorgeous." They continued like this for some minutes before suddenly Tasha froze, the purring stopping mid-breath. Her head went up and her ears swiveled until they locked onto the problem. It was up the hill towards the mine. "It's all right, Tasha," Zack said. But before the sentence was finished, the cat was gone, slinking noiselessly into the nearby undergrowth. "They must be coming back," said Jess, turning off the roll-dee. "Just as well she's got better hearing than we have, or they would have seen her." "They'll need to know sometime," said Zack. "Not yet," said Jess. Not just yet. I want to keep her as our own for a while." "What about the pig hunters and the Neanderthals?" "I know a place where we can keep her," said Jess. "We'll come back in the morning and get her. They'll never find her there." Zack said nothing. Morning was 18 hours away, much too long for his liking.